Welcome to the next part of the variables, strings, and functions. This is challenge 3, ClickCounter, where we're going to create a new project to get started. Okay, and I'm just going to adjust my code window here to use more of my available space. We're going to create a single view application, and we're going to go ahead and call it ClickCounter. Make sure that you have the languages set to Swift, and devices should be universal. Click Next. Again, just always double check to make sure the source control create git repository is unchecked. I'm going to go ahead and create my project in my documents folder. Click Create. Okay, so now let's get started. I'm going to start by going to my main storyboard here. And in my main storyboard, I am going to put a couple of simple objects. Now, what I'm trying to do is create an app that is simply going to count how many times the user has touched a button called click. So, I am going to go to my object browser here, my object library, scroll down until I get to a label, and then I'm going to drag that label to the middle of my storyboard. There we go. And change the name of the label to say clicks. And then I'm going to want to adjust where my label is placed on my storyboard. So I'm going to go ahead and set the alignment to horizontal center. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it to the top by adding a constraint. And you can see that I've got this yellow warning that something is out of place. So I'll just go ahead and use the automatic fix placement update frames option. Okay, and now I have no auto layout issues, which is great. That allows me to go on to my buttons here. So I'm going to place my button below my clicks label. Okay, and I'm going to double change that to say click. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and set my constraints. Again, I'm going to have it horizontally centered, and I'm going to position it so that it is attached to the object above it. Alright, and I have no auto layout issues. Now, if you got a warning, you should know by now how to fix it, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Alright, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that view because I don't need it. And now I'm also going to close up these two side views, and I'm going to click on my Show Assistant Editor so I can see my code window along with my storyboard in a side-by-side view. And because my font is so large, I'm going to move my window over here. Alright, so one thing that's a little bit different is that for the first time, we're not just going to automatically delete these two functions that we got when we created our code here. We've always gotten rid of this viewDidLoad function and this didReceiveMemory warning function. Well, we don't need the memory warning function, so we'll go ahead and delete that one just to clear up the code window. But this viewDidLoad function is somewhat interesting. You'll notice here that my label says clicks on it. Now normally we set the initial value we want our label to have right here on the storyboard so that when it opens it already says what it should say. But if I do that, then the label would just say 0. And that's not really a good name for a label because it doesn't tell me what the label is for. So what I can do is I can use this viewDidLoad function to change anything in my storyboard that should happen right when my view first loads. This thing over here is called a view. Alright, so to do that, if we look at this line right here, this comment, it says, do any additional setup after loading the view, typically from a nib. Well, I don't know what a nib is, and it really doesn't matter. We might look that one up later, but what we're going to do is we're going to replace that line of code with something that changes the label. So we're going to say, oh, but we can't do that because what are we missing, folks? We don't have an outlet yet for our label. So I'm going to control click and drag over here to make an outlet for my label. And remember that when we are naming things, we want to use really good names. We want to start with describing the object and what it does. So this is my clicks object. And then we say what kind of object it is. It's a label. And then we say how it's connected to our code. We're connecting it as an outlet. And then I can hit the connect button, and that creates my label here. So now I have clicks label outlet here in my code window, and I'm going to highlight this comment here, and I'm going to replace it. So I'm just going to delete it, and instead I'm going to use that location to change what that label says. So I'm going to say clicks label outlet, and I want to change the text property of that label, and I want it to say 0. Okay, well, now I can switch my phone here. I'm going to switch to an iPhone 4S because it fits on my screen better, and then I'm going to run it, and we're going to wait for the simulator to warm up here. Here we go. Okay, and notice that it starts out with my label saying 0, even though over here it says clicks. And that's because when this view first appears, this bit of code over here that says clicks label outlet, that says view did load, gets executed. And don't worry about the super.view did load right now. You can just ignore that. But what's important is clicks label outlet.text gets set to 0. Okay, and that will happen anytime that this app loads from scratch. Okay, so what are we going to do next? Well, next we are going to actually decide what we do when the user clicks a button. Well, of course, we have a button click, but right now it doesn't do anything. So let's make it do something. To do that, we need to have a click action. So I'm going to once again, control click or right click and drag over here, and I'm going to put my new action right below my outlet here. So I'm going to change the connection type from outlet to action, and then I'm going to give it a name. So what object am I representing here? I'm representing my click object. And what kind of object is it? Well, it's a button. And how is it connected to my code? It's connected as an action. Now, in my other video tutorials, I've told you to choose arguments none. And you can go ahead and do that. It won't make any difference, but in the online Swift tutorials you've been following at lynda.com, he's always been leaving it as argument sender and type any object. So we're going to go ahead and do that this time so you can see the difference. And really the difference is, if you look here at the code that it created, notice that it added this, sender any object. Now you might be tempted to think, oh, well that's no problem, I don't like that, so I can just delete it. But you can't. If you delete it, you're going to mess up your code relationship between what you have here in your storyboard and your code window. So once you've done that, you're kind of stuck with it. It won't actually affect anything as long as you just leave it the way it is. Okay, so when I've touched the click button, what I want to do is I want to record that the user has actually clicked. That means I have to have a variable that keeps track of how many times I've clicked. So we need to declare a variable. And we declare a variable in 4 steps. The first step is step 1. We write the keyword var. Okay, so I'm going to write var. My next step is going to be to come up with a name for my variable. So I'm going to write a name for the variable. And in this case, I would like my variable to keep track of how many times I have clicked. So I'm going to call it ClickCount. After that, my next step here is going to be to specify the type of the object. So I specify the type of the variable. I said object, it's actually the type of the variable after a colon. So that means that I have to put a colon, and now I have to know what kind of information this variable is going to store. So if I'm counting clicks, I'm counting numbers, and I'm counting whole numbers. You can't really have a half click. If I'm storing whole numbers, then I use something called an integer, and an integer is written as int. int is short for integer. Now you'll notice that there are a whole bunch of different kinds of int I could choose from, and this can get very confusing. Unfortunately, we sort of have to live with that, but we're going to stick with the default type here, which is just simply int. Okay, and then I'm going to go on to my fourth step, which is going to be, oops, there, make it so you can see that a little bit more clearly. Okay, then I have my fourth step, which is to give the variable an initial value after an equals. Okay, so I'm going to write equals, and then what should the initial value of click count be? Well, before I've clicked, how many clicks do I have? I just have 0, so that's going to be my initial value. Okay, now in my click count button action, or click button action here, I want to say, hey, I've just clicked, I need to increase click count by 1. Now there's several different ways to do this. The sort of longest way to write it is to say click count equals click count plus 1, like that. Another way to write it would be to say click count plus equals 1. And still a third way would be to say click count plus plus. You can choose whichever way you prefer. I'm going to go with the longhand way for right now, but you're welcome to pick the one that you like the best. Okay, so now I've recorded a click, but have I changed my label yet to represent that click? And the answer is no, I have not. So now you might think I could just say, okay, well, clicks label outlet dot text should just be equal to click count, because that makes sense. I just update my text to represent the new number of clicks. And it would be nice if life were that simple, but unfortunately, what I'm trying to do here is take text, which is a string, and say I want click count to be in that text position. But this is a number, and I'm not allowed to just take a number and turn it into a string. I have to use a special feature of Swift to convert my number to a string. So the way I do that is I, first of all, need to make the overall thing a string by putting quotes around it. And then the thing I want to convert into a string has to be wrapped inside of parentheses with a backslash in front of it, like that. What this does is it says, take click count, turn it into a string, and then store it in the text of this label. And that's all there is to it. We're ready to run our app and see if it works. Let's see, let's go back to our app here. All right, and I'm ready to click away. Success. Okay, this is worth 2 progress points. All you need to do is demonstrate your working click count app, and you're ready to go.